What kind of father leaves his own daughter at a stranger's ranch? And what happens when that stranger refuses to treat her like something he owns? The wagon rattled away in a cloud of August dust, leaving Edith beside one trunk and a 6'7" cowboy she barely knew. Her father's last insult still burned in her ears. Then Everett Granger looked down at her and asked one question she had never been allowed to answer. "Stay with us and tell us what you would do." The wagon came up the western road just after 3 in the afternoon, when the August heat had begun to soften, but the dust still hung pale over the foothills. Edith Harrow saw High Meadow Ranch long before they reached it. A broad log house sat on a rise above the creek, its roof silvered by years of Montana weather. Beyond it stood a horse barn, a smaller bunkhouse, 3 corrals, and a line of split-rail fence running toward dark timber at the base of the mountains. Cattle moved slowly across the farther pasture, black shapes against grass burned gold by summer. Her father said nothing as the wagon rolled through the open gate. He had spoken very little since Elk Run. That should have warned her. George Harrow was never silent, because he had nothing to say. He was silent when he had already decided something, and saw no reason to include anyone else in the decision. Edith sat beside him with both gloved hands folded over her reticule. Her traveling skirt was too heavy for the weather. Sweat gathered beneath the collar of her blouse, and under the stays her father still insisted made her look more presentable. On the wagon bed behind them rested one trunk. Only one. She had noticed that in Elk Run. Her father had told the hotel porter to load her larger trunk but leave his own valise at the desk. She had asked why. He had told her not to fuss. Now the wagon stopped in front of the ranch house. A man came out of the barn carrying a length of leather harness over one shoulder. Edith had heard of Everett Granger. Everyone who dealt cattle between Elk Run and the Bitterroot country had. Big Granger. Some said he could lift the front end of a wagon clear of a rut by himself. Others claimed he once dragged a yearling out of an irrigation ditch with nothing but a rope and one arm. Edith had never believed half the stories. Then Everett Granger crossed the yard toward them. He was the tallest man she had ever seen. Not merely tall, enormous. His hat sat high above George's. His shoulders filled a faded brown work shirt, and his hands looked large enough to close around a fence post. He moved without hurry, though. No swagger, no performance. He stopped beside the wagon. "Mr. Harrow." "Granger." George climbed down first. Edith waited for him to offer his hand. He did not. She gathered her skirt and stepped down carefully on her own. The ground was uneven beneath her buttoned boots. Her heel slipped slightly in the dust, but she caught herself before either man could move. Everett's eyes flicked toward her. Only once. Then he looked back at George. "You said in your letter you wanted to discuss the September balance." "I did." George removed his gloves one finger at a time. Edith felt something cold settle beneath the heat. Everett glanced toward the trunk. George followed his gaze. "I've had an unfortunate season. So have most men north of the Yellowstone. My circumstances are temporary." Everett waited. George disliked being made to continue without encouragement. Edith knew the small tightening around his mouth. "The amount I owe you cannot be settled in cash before winter." Everett shifted the harness from one shoulder to the other. "Then we'll settle it when you can." George gave a short laugh. "You misunderstand me. I've brought another arrangement." Edith looked at him. Her father did not look back. "Edith will remain here through the winter." The yard seemed to go still. Somewhere near the barn, a horse stamped twice against hard earth. Everett said, "Your daughter?" "Obviously." Edith's fingers tightened around the reticule. George continued in the same voice he used when discussing feed prices. "She can keep house, help your aunt, tend correspondence. She has some ability with figures when she applies herself. Whatever value her labor represents can be credited against my outstanding account. Edith stared at the side of his face. Father. He did not turn. That will be enough. Everett's expression had changed very little, but the harness strap stopped moving in his hand. George went on. Frankly, the arrangement may benefit everyone. Edith has had too much comfort and too little discipline. A few months of actual frontier work may correct habits I have been unable to correct at home. Heat climbed Edith's throat. A ranch hand had come out of the bunkhouse carrying a coffee mug. He stopped when he heard George's voice. Another man stood near the corral gate. Neither pretended not to listen. George finally looked at Edith. His gaze traveled over her body in the familiar way. Not lewdly. Worse. Like an appraiser disappointed by merchandise. Perhaps hard work will accomplish what good breeding and repeated advice have not. Edith's face burned. She wanted to tell him to stop. She wanted to ask what she had done. Instead, she stood beside her trunk with her chin level. She had learned years ago that George Harrow considered tears an admission of guilt. Everett spoke. Mr. Harrow. There was nothing loud in his voice. George nevertheless stopped. You told me in your letter you were bringing something to settle an account. I have. Everett looked toward Edith, then back at him. She's not something. For 1 second, George seemed genuinely confused, then annoyed. Don't make this sentimental. She'll have a roof, food, useful occupation. Your aunt complained last winter that she could use another pair of hands. My aunt complains about most things. One of the ranch hands lowered his coffee mug to hide what might have been a smile. George's jaw tightened. I have business east of Bozeman and cannot waste the afternoon debating words. Edith will remain. You may calculate a fair monthly credit. He climbed back onto the wagon. Edith looked at him. You're leaving. He gathered the reins. For now. You didn't tell me. I am telling you now. Her throat tightened so sharply she could barely swallow. How long? Until matters are resolved. When? George looked toward Everett rather than answering. She has clothing in the trunk. Enough for the season if she's sensible. Edith took 1 step toward the wagon. Father. He snapped the reins. The horses started. The wagon rolled forward. For 1 mad instant she nearly followed. Nearly called after him. Nearly did exactly what he expected. Begged him to reconsider in front of strangers. Her foot stopped at the edge of the yard. George never turned around. The rear wheels crossed the ranch gate and began down the road toward Elk Run. Dust rose behind them and drifted between the fence posts. Edith stood beside the trunk. Her hands had gone numb. The 2 ranch hands quietly found reasons to return to their work. Everett remained where he was. He did not touch her, did not offer comfort, did not say her father had meant well. For that alone she was grateful. The wagon became smaller along the road, then disappeared behind a stand of cottonwoods. Only the sound of the wheels remained. Then even that was gone. Edith looked toward the house. 14 miles back to Elk Run. She had perhaps $6 in her reticule. No horse, no employment, no room waiting for her. And behind her stood a giant cowboy she had met less than 10 minutes ago, a man her father had apparently decided could make use of her until a debt was satisfied. Everett set the harness strap over the fence rail. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. Miss Harrow. She forced herself to turn. He was so tall she had to raise her face to meet his eyes. Did you agree to any of this? The question made no sense at first. Not because she had misheard him, because nobody had asked. Her father had decided. Her father had packed the trunk. Her father had arranged the journey. Her father had spoken for her in the yard. Everett waited. Edith looked at the road where the dust was beginning to settle. No. The word came out almost too softly to hear. Everett nodded once. Then your father's debt belongs to your father. Edith blinked. He walked past her toward the hitching rail. For a moment she thought he was leaving too. Instead, he reached for the reins of a tall bay gelding tied beside the porch. I can have a wagon hitched in 10 minutes. She stared at him. For what? To take you back to Elk Run. Her mouth parted. Everett loosened the horse's knot. If you've got somebody there you trust, I'll take you to them. If you need the hotel, I'll see the room paid through tomorrow. After that, we can figure out what comes next. Edith looked at her trunk, then at the road, then at the enormous man standing beside the bay horse as though returning an abandoned woman to town were no more complicated than mending a broken gate. Behind the ranch house, the mountains rose dark against the late afternoon sky. 14 miles away waited Elk Run, and every person who had watched her father arrive would soon know he had ridden away without her. Everett Granger waited without rushing her. For the first time that day, someone had left the next decision in Edith's hands. She did not yet know what frightened her more: being left at High Meadow Ranch, or discovering she was free to leave it. Edith stood between those two thoughts while the late afternoon wind moved through the cottonwoods beyond the gate. Everett Granger still had one hand on the bay gelding's reins. He had not repeated his offer. He had not told her what she ought to do. That made the silence harder, somehow. Back in Elk Run, there was a hotel with narrow rooms above the dining room. There was the general store, the freight office, the church, and enough people who knew George Harrow's name to make her arrival alone a story before supper. She could already imagine it. George Harrow had left his daughter at Big Granger's ranch. No, Granger sent her back. No, she had become too much trouble even for him. Edith looked toward the road. I don't have anyone in Elk Run. Everett's fingers loosened on the reins. All right. I have money. It sounded defensive. I didn't ask. She opened her reticule anyway and counted what she had without removing it. $6.40. Enough for a hotel room and meals for a handful of days if she was careful. After that, nothing. Everett waited. Edith drew in a slow breath. My father said you needed help. My aunt could use some. And the accounts? They need more help than my aunt does. A faint sound came from the porch. An older woman stood in the doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder. She was small beside Everett, though nearly everyone probably was. Gray threaded through the dark hair pinned at the back of her head. Her sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbows. That's the truest thing you've said all week, she called. Everett glanced toward her. This is my aunt, Nancy Granger. Nancy came down one step. Miss Harrow? Mrs. Granger. Mrs. Granger has been dead 12 years. Nancy will do. Edith nodded. Nancy looked at the trunk, then at Everett, then toward the empty road. She seemed to understand more than anyone had explained. You eaten since noon? Edith had not. Yes. Her stomach betrayed her with a quiet sound. Nancy's eyebrows rose. Everett looked politely toward the barn. Edith closed her eyes for half a second. Nancy turned back toward the house. There's stew. Edith almost laughed, though nothing about the day felt funny. I don't want charity. Nancy stopped. Neither woman moved. Then Nancy said, Good. I don't offer much of it. She went inside. Everett's mouth shifted slightly at one corner. Edith noticed. He noticed her noticing, and the expression disappeared. She looked down at her gloves. What if I worked? For wages? Yes. Everett studied her. Not her waist. Not her hips, her face. What kind of work? Whatever needs doing. That's a poor answer. Edith looked up. He leaned one forearm against the hitching rail. Men say that when they want a job badly enough to promise things they can't do. Better to tell me what you can actually do. No one had ever asked her that either. Edith thought. I can keep household accounts. I can write a clear business hand. I know basic cattle figures. Everett's eyebrows moved. My mother kept my father's ledgers before she died. I used to sit with her. Anything else? I sew. Preserve fruit. Cook well enough. Well enough? Nobody has died. That earned the smallest breath of amusement from him. Edith continued. I can read invoices, check freight charges, keep correspondence. I know how to make soap, though I dislike it. I can help in a kitchen. I don't know much about horses beyond riding in a carriage. She hesitated. And I am not afraid of work. Everett looked toward the barn. You might be after a month here. Then I suppose we'll know. His eyes returned to hers. For a moment neither spoke. Then Everett tied the bay horse back to the rail. $20 a month. Edith blinked. What? Wages. $20. Her father had spoken of her labor as if its value would be calculated afterward, like leftover feed weighed at the end of a season. Everett named a number before she had lifted so much as a spoon. Meals included, he continued. Room in the house. Sundays your own unless stock gets loose or the roof catches fire. Nancy's voice came from inside. If the roof catches fire, I'm taking Sunday anyway. Everett ignored that. If you want to leave, you leave. You give me notice if you can. If you can't, you don't. Edith stared at him. And my father's debt? Still your father's? He won't like that. I don't expect he will. Something almost reckless rose in her. Then I accept. Everett nodded. No handshake. No grand agreement. Just a decision made between two adults in a dusty yard. Then he bent and lifted her trunk. Edith's eyes widened. The thing had taken 2 hotel porters to move comfortably. Everett carried it under one arm. She followed him toward the house. High Meadow looked different from inside. The front room held a long pine table scarred by years of use, 2 heavy chairs near a stone hearth, and a row of pegs where coats and hats hung. A Winchester rested high above the mantel. Near the kitchen stood a dry sink, a black iron cook stove, and shelves lined with flour tins, blue-striped crockery, coffee, salt, and jars of late summer beans. Nothing matched. Everything had a purpose. Nancy was at the stove stirring stew. She pointed with the spoon. Back hall, second door. Everett carried the trunk there. Edith followed. The room was small but clean. A narrow iron bed stood under the window, covered with a patchwork quilt faded from washing. There was a washstand with a white pitcher, a chair, 2 wall pegs, and a little shelf beside the bed. Everett set the trunk down carefully. You need anything changed? Edith looked around. No. The window sticks when the weather turns wet. Lift before you pull. She nodded. He stepped back into the hall, then stopped. One more thing. From his pocket he took a small brass key. He placed it in her palm. Edith looked at it. The lock works? It does. She curled her fingers around the key. Everett rested one hand against the doorframe, careful not to step over the threshold again. Nobody comes through that door unless you invite them. The words landed quietly. Edith had lived 27 years in houses far larger than this one. Rooms with imported wallpaper, carved wardrobes, silk curtains, servants who polished the silver twice a week. Her father had entered any room he pleased, opened letters addressed to her, sent dresses back to seamstresses because he disliked how they fit, ordered meals changed, dismissed people she liked. A lock had never meant much when everyone knew whose house it was. She looked down at the little brass key. "Thank you." Everett gave one short nod. Then he left. He pulled the door nearly closed behind him, but not all the way. Edith stood alone. For the first time since the wagon stopped, she let herself sit. The mattress dipped beneath her weight. She waited for the familiar complaint of strained furniture. None came. Outside, a hammer struck wood near the barn. Once, twice. Then again. Steady, unconcerned. Edith looked at the key in her hand until Nancy called supper. By the time she entered the kitchen, Everett had washed at the pump and changed into a clean shirt. He sat at the table with coffee in a thick white mug, his large hands wrapped around it. Nancy set stew before Edith. "Eat." Edith did. Nobody watched her plate. That was the first thing she noticed. Nobody measured the bread she took. Nobody remarked when Nancy offered another ladle of stew. The realization made Edith slow halfway through the meal. Everett looked up. "Something wrong with it?" "No." Nancy tasted her own. "Needs pepper. It's good. Then eat before it gets cold." So Edith did. Afterward, Nancy disappeared into the front room and returned carrying a stack of books, folded receipts, cattle tallies, and loose papers tied with faded string. She dropped them on the table. Dust rose. Everett leaned back. "Don't frighten her off the first night." Nancy sat across from Edith. "You said you can add." "Yes." Nancy pushed the top ledger toward her. "Prove it." Edith opened the book. The writing inside changed from page to page. Some entries were Everett's, blocky and sparse. Others were Nancy's. Several receipts had been tucked between pages without dates. Feed, wire, salt, blacksmith work, freight, winter oats. Edith turned 3 pages, then another. Her fingertips stopped. These October figures were carried incorrectly. Everett lowered his mug. Nancy leaned closer. "Where?" Edith turned the ledger around and pointed. "This total includes the same freight charge twice." Nancy stared. Everett reached for the book. Edith moved her hand before he could take it, keeping the page open. "And this receipt belongs to September, not October." Everett's hand stopped beside hers. For the first time since she had arrived, something like surprise showed plainly on his face. Edith looked at the pile, then at Nancy. "Do you have a pencil?" Nancy slowly smiled. "Top drawer by the stove." Edith rose to get it. The brass bedroom key rested warm in her pocket. Behind her, Everett said nothing. But when she returned to the table, he had moved the oil lamp closer to her side. For the next several days, Edith woke before sunrise. At first, she told herself it was because High Meadow kept different hours than the Harrow house had. Here, the stove had to be lit before coffee could be made. Horses needed grain before men ate breakfast. Cattle did not care whether a woman had slept poorly, but that was not the whole of it. She wanted to be useful before anyone had time to decide she was not. By 6 each morning, Nancy was in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled up, measuring flour into a yellow bowl. Everett usually came in from the yard, with cold air following him, mud on his boots, and the smell of leather and horse clinging to his coat. He drank his coffee from the same thick white mug. He never said much before the second cup. Edith noticed that quickly. She noticed other things, too. Everett folded newspapers before setting them down. He checked the back door latch every night. When Nancy's hands stiffened in the morning, he opened jars without making a point of it. He never sat until the women had taken their places, though he seemed unaware he did this. And he never once watched what Edith ate. That still unsettled her. On the fourth morning, Nancy found Edith trying to lift a flour sack from the pantry floor. It was heavier than she expected. She had both arms around it and had managed perhaps 3 inches before the cloth began slipping against her dress. "Don't be foolish," Nancy said. Edith tightened her grip. "I have it." "You plainly do not." Before Edith could answer, Everett came through the back door carrying a coil of rope. He looked at the sack, then at Edith. Her face warmed. "I can manage." Everett set the rope down. "I expect you can." He took hold of one end of the sack. Edith looked at him. "2 people have 4 hands," he said. "No sense pretending otherwise." He did not take it from her. Together they carried it to the work table. That should not have mattered. It did. By the end of the first week, Edith had sorted most of the loose receipts into months, mended 3 torn pillowcases, helped Nancy bottle late beans, and learned where the ranch kept everything from lamp oil to horseshoe nails. Still, she felt restless. The housework was honest, but every time she looked through the kitchen window, she saw the ranch moving without her. Men crossing the yard with saddles, horses led from the barn, cattle shifting along the north fence. One morning she asked Nancy, "Do you think I could learn to ride properly?" Nancy looked up from peeling apples. "Ask Everett." The answer irritated Edith. "Why him?" "Because I don't know anything about horses except which end bites." So after breakfast, Edith went looking for him. She found him near the East Corral repairing a gate hinge with Sam Turner and another hand named Lewis Pike. Sam was young, barely 19, with sun-browned cheeks and a habit of pushing his hat back when he was thinking. Lewis was older and spoke very little. Everett glanced up when Edith approached. "Something wrong?" "No." She almost lost her nerve. Then she said, "I'd like to learn to ride." Sam looked down at the hinge. Lewis suddenly became interested in a length of wire. Everett straightened. "You ever ridden? Side saddle." "Years ago." "That isn't what I asked." Edith held his gaze. "Not properly." Everett nodded toward the small mare tied near the barn. "That's Daisy. Quietest horse on the place." Edith looked at the mare. Daisy was a compact bay with one white sock and patient eyes. "I can start with her." Everett did not answer right away. Edith heard the hesitation and mistook it for doubt. "You think I can't?" His eyes came back to her. "I think a person ought to know what they're agreeing to before they climb onto 1,200 pounds of animal." Sam coughed into his fist. Everett glanced at him. Sam became silent. 10 minutes later, Edith stood beside Daisy with a borrowed saddle on the ground. The saddle had belonged to one of the ranch hands. It was narrow through the seat, worn smooth at the edges, and clearly made for someone built nothing like her. Edith saw that. She used it anyway. She did not want special treatment. That decision lasted until she tried to mount. Daisy shifted. Edith put her foot in the stirrup, pushed upward, and felt the saddle slide sideways. She dropped back to the ground. Sam looked away quickly. Lewis rubbed his jaw. Edith reset the saddle herself. Everett came closer. "Hold up. I can do it." "The saddle's moving." "I know." She tightened the cinch. Daisy flattened her ears. Everett reached for the leather. Edith stepped between him and the horse. "I said, I can do it." The words came sharper than she intended. Everyone went still. Everett studied her face. Then he let his hand fall. All right. Edith mounted on the second try. For perhaps 5 seconds, she felt triumphant. Then Daisy took 3 short steps and tossed her head. The saddle pinched at the mare's shoulder. Edith's balance shifted with it. She pulled the reins too tightly. Daisy sidestepped. Sam moved forward. Everett raised one hand without looking at him. Stay. Edith's pulse thudded in her ears. She could feel both ranch hands watching. Her skirt had ridden awkwardly. One stirrup was too short. The saddle pressed her forward in a way that made every movement clumsy. Daisy tossed her head again. Edith heard a small laugh. She did not know whether it came from Sam or Lewis. That was enough. Her face burned. Stop! Everett's voice was quiet. Daisy slowed. He took the rein near the bit and steadied her. Get down! Edith stared at him. I said get down! The humiliation rose hot and fast. I knew this was a mistake. Everett looked up at her. The saddle is... She blinked. What? The saddle. He helped steady Daisy while Edith dismounted. The moment her boots touched the ground, she stepped away. Everett unbuckled the cinch and lifted the saddle off. He turned it upside down. Too narrow here. He pointed along the tree. Wrong angle through the shoulder. Stirrup leathers set too far forward for you, too. Edith stared at the saddle. Sam and Lewis still stood nearby. Everett looked over. You two don't have work? They moved immediately. Sam took the hinge tools. Lewis disappeared toward the barn. Edith looked after them. You didn't have to send them away, I know. That made her look back. Everett carried the saddle into the barn. After a moment, she followed. The inside smelled of hay, dust, leather oil, and horse sweat. Sunlight cut through the boards in narrow strips. Everett climbed a short ladder to the loft and returned with another saddle. This one was broader, older. He set it across a stand and checked the rigging before bringing it to Daisy. Edith watched silently. When he finished, he adjusted the stirrup length. Try this. She did not move. Everett looked at her. Miss Harrow? Her throat tightened. Do you think I'm too heavy? He said nothing. Edith forced herself to continue. For the horse. Everett looked at Daisy, then at the discarded saddle lying near the wall. No. The answer came without hesitation. He touched the narrow saddle with the toe of his boot. For that saddle? Yes. Edith stared at him. That's why we changed the saddle. There was no pity in his voice, no attempt to flatter her. He said it as though explaining that a boot too small required a larger boot. Something in Edith's chest loosened. Everett led Daisy closer. This one spreads weight better. Sit deeper. Don't pull against her mouth. Give her room to find you. Edith mounted. This time the saddle stayed true. Daisy took one step, then another. Everett walked beside them with one hand near the rein, but not touching it. Easy. Edith breathed. Daisy's ears relaxed. They made one slow circle inside the corral, then another. By the third, Everett stepped back. Edith noticed. You aren't coming? You don't need me for this part. She looked ahead. The gate stood open. Beyond it, the ranch road stretched past the barn and toward the cottonwoods. Her hands tightened on the reins. Everett saw it. Don't prove anything today. She glanced at him. Just ride the horse you've got. So she did. She rode Daisy across the yard, past the bunkhouse, past Nancy, who stood on the porch holding a dish towel and pretending not to watch. At the north fence, Edith turned the mare carefully. The sun was low enough to throw long shadows across the grass. When she came back, Everett was bent over the gate hinge again. His hat shaded his face. Edith rode past him. He did not look up. But as she crossed the yard, she saw the corner of his mouth lift, only slightly. Then it disappeared. Edith looked forward before he could catch her watching. For the first time in years, being noticed did not feel like being measured. By the middle of September, the mornings at High Meadow had sharpened. Mist lay low over the creek before sunrise, and the boards of the back porch felt cold beneath Edith's shoes when she stepped outside with coffee. The cottonwoods along the lower pasture had begun turning yellow at their edges. Her days settled into a rhythm. Breakfast before 6, housework with Nancy until mid-morning, ledger work at the kitchen table after that, riding Daisy in the late afternoon when weather and chores allowed. At first, Everett passed through the kitchen without paying much attention to the papers spread around Edith's elbows. Then she began asking questions. What did you pay Hugh Barrett per head for handling the August shipment? Everett stopped in the doorway. Depends which shipment. The one sent south on the 12th, he thought. $1.25 commission. Edith looked at the receipt. This says $1.50. Everett came closer. The table looked small when he leaned over it. He smelled faintly of cold air and saddle leather. Edith kept her eyes on the paper. Everett took the receipt between 2 fingers. Could be a mistake. Maybe. She placed another beside it. This one is the same. He looked at her. Also a mistake? Edith did not answer. Nancy, slicing apples near the stove, said, She's been doing that all morning. Doing what? Finding things you don't want found. Everett set the receipts down. Edith reached for the main ledger. She had reorganized it by month, tying loose invoices into bundles and marking each with pencil. Freight bills went to one side. Feed and salt purchases to another. Cattle sales had their own stack. The work felt familiar. Her mother had once kept books in a similar fashion at the Harrow place. George never spoke of that. To him, his wife had hosted dinners, attended church, and produced 2 children. Edith remembered something different. Ink-stained fingers, columns of numbers, a small brass ruler laid across ledger lines, her mother's voice saying, Don't trust a total just because someone wrote it neatly. Edith placed the ruler across the page now. How many steers did you send with Barrett on June 21st? Everett rubbed a thumb along his jaw. 112. You're certain? I counted them at the South Pen. Your branding tally says 112. She slid another paper toward him. Barrett's receipt says 106 arrived. Everett's eyes narrowed. 6 could drift off on the trail, yes. Edith turned another page. Except he billed you commission on 112. Silence settled over the kitchen. Nancy stopped slicing. Everett read both papers again. Then he said, Show me the rest. Edith had been waiting for that. She untied a bundle. 3 seasons of receipts spread across the table. Some were creased from saddlebags. Others had grease stains or faded pencil marks. A few carried Hugh Barrett's clean signature near the bottom. Edith pointed. Here. Then another. And here. She moved slowly, giving Everett time to follow. The sale weights for 5 shipments don't match the branding counts. In 2 cases, you paid commission on the full number, but were credited for fewer cattle. Everett's face had gone very still. Edith continued. This freight charge appears twice in October last year. Same wagon company, same amount, same date. Could be copied wrong. It could. She slid a third paper beneath it. But the wagon company receipt only shows one delivery. Everett pulled out a chair and sat. That worried Edith more than if he had sworn. He rarely sat during the day unless he was eating. Nancy wiped her hands on her apron. How much? Edith looked down. I don't know yet. Guess. I'd rather not. Everett lifted his eyes. How much can you prove? That was different. Edith checked the figures she had penciled on a scrap sheet. $287.60. Nancy let out a breath. Everett said nothing. For High Meadow, it was not ruin. But it was not small money either, especially with winter coming. Edith folded her hands. There may be more. Everett stood abruptly. The chair scraped hard against the floor. Nancy looked at him. Where are you going? Barn. Why? Because if I stay here, I'm liable to ride into Elk Run and do something stupid. Edith watched him cross the room. At the door, he stopped. Without turning, he said, Hugh Barrett has bought my cattle 6 years. Nancy's knife resumed cutting. Men steal from people who trust them all the time. Everett opened the door. Cold wind moved through the kitchen. Then he was gone. Edith sat very still. A few minutes later came the sound of an axe from behind the barn. Hard. Measured. Again. Again. Nancy kept slicing apples. That means he's thinking. Edith glanced toward the window. I thought thinking was quieter. Not with Everett. By noon, the axe stopped. Everett did not return for dinner. Edith found herself checking the yard more often than she needed to. At 3, Sam Turner came in for coffee. He took off his hat, saw the papers covering the table, and slowed. Something wrong? Nancy poured him half a mug. Depends how fond you are of Mr. Barrett. Sam's face changed slightly. Edith noticed. You know him well? Sam shrugged. Everybody does. Has he ever handled cattle for this ranch directly? Sometimes. When? Sam looked toward the door. Last spring. Mr. Granger sent me and Lewis with a bunch down toward Elk Run. Barrett met us near Miller's Crossing. Edith reached for a blank sheet. How many head? Sam frowned. Don't recall exactly. Close. Maybe 90. Did any drift? One went lame. We brought it back. Edith looked at the papers. Only one? Yes, ma'am. She found the April receipt. Barrett had deducted 4. Sam leaned over. That ain't right. Edith glanced up. You're certain? I counted them twice. A shadow filled the doorway. Everett had returned. His sleeves were rolled back, and wood dust clung to one forearm. Counted what twice? Sam straightened. Edith handed Everett the receipt. He read it, then looked at Sam. How many came back? 1, sir. You sure? Yes. Everett handed the paper back to Edith. Write that down. She did. Name, date, shipment, returned animal. Everett watched the pencil move. Then he walked to the stove and poured coffee into his white mug. He drank half of it standing. What do you need from me? Edith looked up. The question surprised her. Every cattle tally you still have. Where? Anywhere. He nodded. Anything else? Old correspondence from Barrett. Bills of sale. Freight notices. Everett took another drink. I've got some in the desk. Some? His mouth tightened. Nancy said, He files by throwing paper into whichever drawer still opens. Everett ignored her. I'll bring everything. For the rest of the afternoon, the ranch house became an office. Everett emptied a desk drawer onto the table, then another. Sam carried in an old wooden box from the tack room containing folded shipping papers. Nancy found bills tucked inside a kitchen tin where someone had once decided financial records belonged beside nutmeg. Edith worked through all of it. She forgot supper, forgot the fire had burned low, forgot that Everett had taken the chair across from her and stayed there. By lamplight, the pattern became clearer, not dramatic, not obvious. That was what made it worse. A few cattle missing here, an extra freight fee there, weights recorded slightly low, commissions slightly high, amounts small enough that a busy rancher might curse his memory and move on. Over years, they became something else. Edith finally leaned back. Her neck ached. Everett sat with his forearms on his knees. How bad? She looked at the pages. I can prove more than $400 now. Nancy whispered, Lord. Everett stared at the floor. Edith watched his hands. Large hands, scarred knuckles, hands that could mend gates and gentle horses and lift her trunk like a valise. They were clenched now, not because of the money alone. She understood that. Trust cost something, too. I should have seen it, he said. Edith looked at him. You were running a ranch. That's not an excuse. No. His eyes came up. She continued. It's the reason it worked. Everett said nothing. You trusted the man handling one part of your business so you could handle the rest. He appears to have counted on that. The room stayed quiet. Then Everett looked at the receipts again. Can you prove enough to make him answer? Edith glanced across the table. Yes. There was no hesitation this time. Everett leaned back slowly. Something had changed in the way he looked at her. Not surprise anymore. Not courtesy. Wait. As though her words now carried some of their own, Nancy gathered the empty coffee cups. I'd say George Harrow made a fairly serious accounting error. Edith frowned. What do you mean? Nancy looked at Everett. Then at Edith. He called you useless. Everett's gaze stayed on Edith. He was wrong. Only 3 words, plainly spoken. Still, Edith's fingers stopped over the ledger. Everett stood. I'll ride into Elk Run tomorrow. Edith's eyes sharpened. Why? To speak to Barrett? No. Everett paused. Nancy stopped with the cups in her hands. Edith surprised herself nearly as much as him. If he knows we've found something, he'll start explaining before we know what questions to ask. Everett looked down at her. We? Edith held his gaze. The word had slipped out naturally. Yes. For a moment, only the stove ticked as it cooled. Then Everett sat back down. All right. Edith pulled another receipt toward the lamp. We finish first. Everett reached for his coffee, found the mug empty, and set it down again. Then we finish. Outside, wind moved along the eaves. Inside, Edith bent over the figures while the giant cowboy waited for her to tell him where to look next. High Meadow had given her a room because she had nowhere else to sleep. Now, for the first time, it needed something only she had seen. The next 2 weeks passed under a sky that seemed to change every hour. Cold mornings gave way to bright afternoons. Wind came down from the timber in long breaths that rattled the barn roof and sent yellow cottonwood leaves skittering across the yard. Edith spent most of those days between the kitchen table and the ranch office, sorting receipts, copying figures, and building a cleaner record of what Hugh Barrett had handled. Everett did not ride into Elk Run. He kept his word. That mattered. Whenever impatience showed in him, it appeared in small ways. He sharpened pencils too often. He walked through the kitchen, stopped beside the table, asked whether Edith needed anything, then left before she could answer more than no. Once she caught him reading the same freight notice 3 times without turning the page. Still, he did not interfere. By early October, High Meadow had another concern: Elk Run's autumn supper. Nancy announced it over breakfast as though discussing weather. "We're going Saturday." Everett looked up from his coffee. "No." Nancy buttered a biscuit. "I wasn't asking you. I've got fence to finish. You've had fence to finish every October since you were 20. It keeps breaking. Interesting how it always breaks the week of the supper." Edith kept her eyes on her plate. Nancy turned toward her. "You'll come." Edith nearly said no. She had not been back to Elk Run since George left her at the ranch. She knew what the town would have heard by now. Ranch country could carry a story farther than a telegraph wire, and with less concern for accuracy. "I don't think so." Nancy chewed slowly. "Why?" "I have work." Everett lowered his mug. Nancy looked between them. "You've both caught the same disease." Edith gave the faintest smile despite herself. Nancy leaned back. "Folks will talk whether you're there or not. Might as well make them work for the privilege." That ended the matter as far as Nancy was concerned. Saturday afternoon, Edith opened her trunk. Near the bottom lay the red dress. She had almost left it in Missouri. The fabric was deep wine red, plain by the standards of her father's house but richer than anything else she owned at High Meadow. The sleeves fitted neatly at the wrists, and the bodice had been cut to suit her figure rather than hide it. Her mother had chosen the cloth years ago. George had hated it. He had stood behind Edith at a mirror and said bright colors only made a large woman harder to overlook. She had worn brown and gray more often after that. Now she held the dress across her lap. A knock sounded. "Come in." Nancy entered carrying a hairbrush and stopped when she saw the red. "There." Edith looked at her. "There what?" "That's the one." "I may wear the blue." "No. The blue is respectable. The blue looks like rainwater." Edith ran her thumb along the red sleeve. "People stare." Nancy's expression softened, though her voice did not. "People stare at Everett because he's 6'7". He still goes outside." That pulled a real laugh from Edith. Nancy smiled. "Put it on." An hour later, Edith came down the hall with her hair pinned simply at the back of her head. Everett stood near the front door fastening his coat. He looked up, then stopped. Entirely. One hand stayed on the top button. Edith slowed. The silence stretched. Her old instinct returned so quickly it embarrassed her. She looked down at herself. "Is it too much?" Everett blinked. "What?" "The dress." "No." He was still staring. Edith's shoulders tightened. Everett seemed to notice at last. He cleared his throat and reached for his hat. "I was trying to remember how to speak." Nancy made a satisfied sound from behind Edith. Everett shot his aunt a look. Edith felt warmth rise into her face, but this time it did not burn. Everett opened the door. "Ready?" She nodded. The road into Elk Run took nearly an hour and a half by wagon. Evening light stretched long across the foothills. Frost already silvered the shaded grass in places, though the open ground still smelled dry and dusty beneath the wagon wheels. Everett drove. Nancy sat beside him. Edith rode in the rear with a wool wrap around her shoulders, listening to the harness creak and trying not to think about town. She failed. The meeting hall stood behind the church, a wide timber building used for suppers, dances, auctions, and elections. Lamps burned inside the windows when they arrived. Wagons lined the road. Horses stamped along the hitch rail, their breath pale in the cooling air. The noise inside hit Edith first. Voices. Fiddle strings being tested, plates and cups, boot heels on pine boards. Then came the looks. Some people smiled. Some did not. Several simply looked too long. Edith felt her back straighten. Everett handed Nancy down from the wagon, then turned toward Edith. He offered his hand. She took it. His palm was warm and rough beneath her glove. He did not pull her down. He only steadied her until both boots touched the ground. Inside, Nancy was immediately claimed by 3 women near the food tables. Edith remained with Everett. That too was noticed. A rancher's wife named Mrs. Colby approached while Everett was speaking with a stock man near the trottoir. She looked Edith over with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Miss Harrow, we wondered whether you'd still be at High Meadow." Edith adjusted the edge of her wrap. "I'm employed there." "So we've heard." Mrs. Colby's gaze moved toward Everett. "Mr. Granger has always been generous." Edith understood. She chose not to help the woman say it. Mrs. Colby continued, "Remarkably charitable, really, keeping a woman under his roof when there is no family connection." Everett had stopped speaking to the stockman. Edith could feel it before she looked. Mrs. Colby noticed too. Her smile thinned. Edith said, "He pays me for work." "I'm sure." That was when Everett stepped closer. Not in front of Edith, beside her. "Mrs. Colby." His voice was calm. The woman turned. "Mr. Granger." Everett said nothing else. He did not need to. Mrs. Colby suddenly remembered someone waiting near the supper table. She excused herself. Edith let out a breath. "You didn't have to do that." Everett looked at her. "I didn't do anything." She almost smiled. "No, you didn't." Across the room, a fiddle began a slow tune. Couples moved toward the open floor. Edith watched without meaning to. She had danced at formal dinners before, years ago. Usually with men selected by George. Men whose hands rested carefully at her waist, as if afraid someone might think they enjoyed it. Everett followed her gaze. She looked away. He did not speak. The tune ended. Another began, quicker this time. Nancy was laughing near the wall with a cup of cider in her hand. Edith found herself wondering whether it would be easier simply to sit. Then Everett moved. He crossed in front of her, past 2 tables, past a group of cattlemen, past enough people that conversations began to thin. He stopped directly before Edith. At 6'7", he blocked half the room behind him, but his voice was low enough for only her to hear. "Would you like to dance?" Not, "Shall we show them?" Not, "You ought to." Not, "Come." The choice was hers. Edith looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. "Yes." His fingers closed carefully around hers. On the dance floor, the difference in their height was almost absurd. Edith realized it immediately and nearly laughed. Everett noticed. "What?" "Nothing. That's not true. You are very tall, so I've been told." She smiled. His other hand settled lightly at her side. Not gripping, not steering more than necessary. The fiddle carried them through the turn. Edith missed one step. Everett adjusted without comment. She looked up at him. "You dance?" "Poorly. You haven't stepped on me." "Yet." That surprised another laugh out of her. And for several turns around the floor, Edith forgot the room, forgot Mrs. Colby, forgot George, forgot that she had spent most of her life entering rooms already wondering what people would find wrong. Everett looked at her as though dancing with her required his full attention. Nothing more, nothing less. When the tune ended, his hand remained around hers for one beat too long. Then he let go. Applause moved through the room for the musicians. Edith's pulse had not settled. Everett leaned slightly toward her. "Coffee? Please." He walked toward the refreshment table. Edith stayed where she was. That was when she saw Hugh Barrett. He stood near the side wall beside the small bar where cider and stronger drinks were being served. Well-dressed, gray coat, silver watch chain, a clean white collar that looked too fine for a cattle buyer. He held a glass in one hand, and he was not looking at Everett. He was looking at Edith, not at the red dress, not with curiosity. His eyes dropped to the small leather folio she had brought from High Meadow and left beneath her wrap on a chair near the wall, the folio containing copied figures. Then his gaze returned to her face. Hugh lifted his glass slightly, a greeting. Edith did not return it. Across the room, Everett was pouring coffee into 2 cups. Hugh smiled, very faintly. Then he turned away. By the time Everett returned, Edith's amusement was gone. He handed her a cup. "What happened?" She glanced toward the side wall. Hugh Barrett was no longer there. Edith wrapped both hands around the warm coffee. "Nothing yet." Everett followed her gaze. His face changed. Only a little, but she saw it. The dance had ended. Something else had begun. For the rest of October, neither Edith nor Everett mentioned what had happened on the dance floor. They did not need to. Something had changed in the spaces between ordinary things. Everett still came into the kitchen before sunrise with frost on his coat shoulders. Edith still kept the ranch book spread beneath the oil lamp after supper. Nancy still complained that both of them drank coffee as if beans grew on the back fence. But now Edith noticed when Everett stood too close to reach for a receipt. Everett noticed when she tucked a loose strand of hair behind one ear while working. Sometimes their eyes met across the table. One of them would look away first. Not always the same one. By the first week of November, the mountains had gone white. The lower ranch remained brown and gold, but every morning the snow line crept farther down through the timber. Everett began checking the haystacks twice a day and keeping extra wood split beneath the porch roof. On a Tuesday afternoon, Nancy packed a small carpet bag. "My cousin Ruth has taken sick in Elk Run." Edith looked up from the kitchen table. "Badly?" "Bad enough that her daughter sent word." Everett stood near the stove pulling on his coat. "I'll drive you." "You won't." "Nancy." "Sam can." Everett frowned. Nancy buttoned her cloak. "You've got cattle in the upper pasture and weather coming. I have managed 61 years without being carried everywhere by a man the size of a barn door." Sam Turner, waiting outside, wisely said nothing. By 3, Nancy was gone. Before dark, the wind changed. Everett noticed first. He stepped onto the porch, looked north, then stood with one hand on the post. Edith joined him. The sky beyond the ridge had turned the color of iron. Snow. Before midnight. Will Nancy be all right? She'll be in town long before it reaches them. He glanced at her dress. "You should bring in anything you don't want frozen." By 7, snow tapped softly against the windows. By 9, it was coming sideways. The road disappeared first. Then the lower fence. Then the barn became little more than a dark shape beyond the yard. High Meadow seemed to draw inward around them. Edith sat at the kitchen table with the Barrett receipts stacked neatly beside her, but she had stopped reading the figures. Everett was at the stove drying one glove near the heat. The calves? Under shelter. Horses? Barns shut tight. And the north gate? He looked at her, checked it. She nodded. He smiled faintly. You've been here 2 months and already ask like Nancy. I'll try to recover. Too late. The remark was small. Still, it warmed the room more than the stove did. Later, Edith carried the coffee pot to the table. Everett reached for his mug. Their fingers brushed. Neither moved immediately. Then Edith set the pot down. Everett withdrew his hand. The silence that followed was not awkward. That was almost worse. Snow pressed against the glass. The lamp burned low. Edith looked toward the window. My father used to say winter made people sentimental. Everett leaned back. Your father seems to have an opinion about most things. He does. A pause. He had opinions about marriage, too. Everett's expression changed, but he did not ask. Edith traced one finger along the edge of her cup. There were men, I figured. 3 that became serious enough for my father to discuss terms. The word terms sounded ugly in the quiet kitchen. Everett waited. Edith gave a short, humorless laugh. The first was 35 and owned a flour mill outside St. Joseph. He told father he would agree if I lost 40 pounds before the wedding. Everett's eyes lifted. Edith continued before she lost nerve. The second was a widower with 2 daughters. He never spoke to me directly about it. He told father he could overlook my figure if the settlement were doubled. The stove popped. Everett's jaw tightened. Edith watched the coffee darken against the inside of her cup. The third decided against it after supper. Why? He said I ate too confidently. Everett stared at her. For 1 second, Edith thought he had not heard correctly. Then he looked down at his hands. What does that mean? I never found out. His thumb moved once over the rim of his mug. Probably nothing worth knowing. Edith smiled despite herself. Then the smile faded. After a while, marriage stopped sounding like something a woman wanted. It sounded like something a man agreed to tolerate if enough money came with her. Everett did not answer. The room settled around them. Wind moved beneath the eaves with a low whistle. Edith almost regretted telling him. Then Everett said, "A husband shouldn't be rewarded for tolerating his wife." She looked up. His eyes were on the stove. He ought to understand what it means that she chose him. The words were plain. He said them as though discussing fence posts or winter feed. That made them harder to dismiss. Edith's throat tightened. Not every woman gets to choose. No. His gaze met hers. But she should. Nothing moved for a long moment. Edith became aware of the clock ticking on the shelf. The snow, the lamp. Everett's hand resting inches from hers on the table. She had been looked at by men before. Measured. Judged. Considered. Everett looked at her as if waiting for something he had no intention of taking. Near 11, he stood. I need to check the barn once more. In this? Won't take long. Edith rose too. I'll bring the lantern. You don't have to. I know. He looked at her, then handed her the second lantern. They crossed the yard together. Snow had already reached the tops of Edith's boots. Everett moved slowly so she could keep pace, though he never mentioned doing it. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and warm animals. Daisy lifted her head when Edith approached. Edith rubbed the mare's forehead. Everett checked stall latches, then added hay to 2 feeders. By the time they returned to the house, snow clung to Edith's hair and shoulders. She laughed when Everett shook his hat beneath the porch roof and sent a spray of white across the boards. He looked at her. really looked. The laugh died softly between them. Edith stood near the door. Everett was close enough now that she had to tilt her face upward. Snow melted along the collar of his coat. His hand moved, not toward her, then stopped. Edith could hear his breathing. Her own seemed too loud. Neither spoke. She thought of the dance, his hand at her side, the long ride home afterward, every silence since. Everett leaned slightly closer. Edith did not move away. His eyes dropped once to her mouth, then returned to hers. The distance between them became very small. Everett stopped. He stepped back. Not far. Just enough. Edith's chest tightened. Had she mistaken everything? He saw the question on her face. Edith. It was the first time he had used her given name. His voice had gone low. You came here because another man made a decision for you. She said nothing. I'm not going to become another one. The wind pushed snow against the porch railing. Everett opened the door for her. She remained where she was. You thought I didn't want you to? He went still. That was answer enough. Edith felt heat rise beneath the cold in her cheeks. Everett looked toward the yard. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. I think wanting something and having a right to it are different matters. Edith could not find an answer. Everett stepped inside long enough to set down his lantern. Then he reached for his coat again. Where are you going? Barn. You just checked it. I know. He pulled on his gloves. Edith watched him cross the porch and disappear into the falling snow. She stood in the doorway long after the barn door closed behind him. The house felt suddenly too quiet. She touched 2 fingers lightly to her lips. Nothing had happened. That was the strange part. Nothing had happened, and yet she knew with a certainty she could no longer explain away that safety was not the only reason Everett Granger mattered to her. She wanted the man who had stepped back, and for the first time, being wanted in return frightened her less than the thought that he might never step forward. The snow held for 3 days. By the 4th morning, the clouds broke apart over the mountains and left high meadow buried beneath a clean white silence. Sunlight struck the upper slopes so brightly Edith had to shade her eyes when she stepped onto the porch. Nancy returned from Elk Run shortly before noon. She came bundled in 2 shawls, complaining about Ruth's refusal to stay in bed and about Sam's driving in equal measure. Within an hour, she had reclaimed the kitchen, criticized the state of the flour bin, and announced that neither Edith nor Everett had eaten properly while she was gone. Neither of them argued. Something else had settled into the house. Not awkwardness exactly. Awareness. Everett no longer lingered beside Edith without seeming to notice it. When he reached across her for a receipt, he left more room than before. When she carried coffee to the porch, his fingers took the cup without touching hers. His restraint was so careful that Edith sometimes wanted to shake him. Instead, she worked. The Barrett papers had grown into 4 separate bundles. One morning, while comparing an August receipt against Everett's retained cattle tally, Edith noticed something she had missed before. The ink changed, only slightly. The original figures had been written in dark brown. One number near the bottom was blacker, narrower, squeezed between the others. She held the paper closer to the window. Everett. He was repairing a bridle strap near the stove. He looked up immediately. What? Come here. He crossed the room. Edith set 2 receipts side by side. Look at your signature. He did. That's mine. Now look above it. Everett leaned closer. A shipping total had been altered from 114 to 104. The second digit had been scraped lightly and rewritten. Everett's face hardened. Could that have happened before I signed it? No. Edith touched the paper beside his name. Your ink overlaps the original total here. The changed figure sits over the dried stroke. Nancy came from the pantry. What have you found? Edith handed her the receipt. Someone changed it after Everett signed. Nancy's mouth tightened. Edith reached for another paper. And this one is worse. It listed a November shipment from the previous year, 87 cattle. But the date bothered her. She checked Everett's herd book, then the weather notes Nancy had kept, because a hard freeze had damaged 2 water troughs that week. There wasn't a shipment on this date. Everett looked at her. There was. Where? South Lot. Edith shook her head. You couldn't have sent 87 from the South Lot. You had 63 there after the October sale. Everett took the herd book. He read the figures twice, then once more. His jaw shifted. I remember Barrett sending a receipt. Yes. Edith tapped it. But I don't think the cattle existed. The kitchen went quiet. Nancy sat down. Everett remained standing. Edith continued more slowly. He may have copied figures from another shipment, charged commission on cattle he never handled. Everett picked up the receipt. For several seconds he said nothing. Then a horse sounded outside. Not one of High Meadows. The hoofbeats came fast up the frozen road. Sam appeared at the kitchen door. Mr. Barrett. Everett turned. Edith's hand closed over the papers. Don't leave them out. Everett looked at her. She was already gathering the altered receipt and false shipment into the leather folio. Nancy slid the remaining bundles into the lower cupboard. By the time Hugh Barrett entered the yard, the table held only coffee cups and an ordinary feed invoice. He came through the door without waiting long after his knock. Snow clung to the shoulders of his gray coat. His boots were polished despite the road, and his silver watch chain caught the light when he removed his gloves. Granger, Hugh. Barrett smiled toward Nancy. Mrs. Granger. Nancy. Then his eyes found Edith. Miss Harrow. The same smile she had seen across the meeting hall appeared. Pleasant. Measured. I hope High Meadow hasn't worked you too hard. Edith folded her hands over the closed folio. Not yet. Barrett's gaze dropped to it. Only for a moment. Everett saw. What brings you 14 miles through snow? Business. Hugh removed his coat. Spring arrangements. No harm in planning early. Everett did not invite him to sit. Hugh noticed, but took a chair anyway. I hear you've been reconsidering some old accounts. Edith felt the room tighten. Everett leaned one shoulder against the wall. Who told you that? Hugh shrugged. Elk Run is small. Nancy set a coffee mug on the table harder than necessary. Hugh smiled. Nothing wrong with checking books, of course. His eyes moved to Edith. So long as a person understands what she's reading. Edith did not answer. Hugh reached for the feed invoice lying on the table. Everett's hand came down over it first. That's mine. Hugh stopped. Naturally. Everett slid the paper away. What do you want? Hugh's smile thinned. I'd like to avoid misunderstandings. Then explain the missing cattle. Silence. Hugh looked at Edith again. That her conclusion? Everett straightened. Edith saw it happen. His shoulders set. One hand closed at his side. She reached out and touched his sleeve. Barely. Everett looked down at her hand, then at her face. Edith shook her head once. He stopped. Not happily, but he stopped. Edith opened the folio. She removed one receipt. Only one. She laid it before Hugh. "Did you write this?" Hugh glanced down. "Looks like one of mine." "Was the shipment 114 head or 104? His eyes sharpened. "Hard to remember every number." "Then perhaps you'll remember your own handwriting." She pushed the receipt closer. The 4 was altered. Hugh leaned back. "You're making a considerable accusation." "No." Edith's voice stayed quiet. "I'm asking a question." Hugh's mouth tightened. "You're a housekeeper." Everett shifted again. Edith's hand remained lightly against his sleeve. She did not look at him. Hugh continued. "Cattle accounts are not parlor arithmetic. Trail losses happen. Weights change. Men miscount. A woman newly arrived from Missouri might not understand that." Edith pulled out the second receipt. "Did 87 High Meadow cattle leave for Elk Run on November 9th last year?" Hugh looked at it. A pause. "According to that paper, according to High Meadow's herd count, those cattle weren't there to send." Hugh's gaze hardened. "You're calling me a thief?" "No." Edith met his eyes. "I'm asking you to explain how you charged commission on cattle that did not exist." Nancy stopped moving at the stove. Outside, a horse stamped against frozen ground. Hugh looked toward Everett. "You letting her conduct your business now?" Everett's answer came flat. "Right now, yes." Hugh pushed back his chair. "Then you're a bigger fool than people say." Everett moved. Edith caught his sleeve more firmly. "Everett." His name stopped him. Hugh saw that too. Something unpleasant flickered across his face. He reached toward the receipt. Edith covered it with her hand. "No." Hugh's fingers stopped inches away. "That's my document. It's Everett's receipt. You don't know how business works out here." Edith slid the paper back into the folio. "I know a man doesn't ride 14 miles through fresh snow to retrieve a harmless mistake." That landed. Hugh's face changed. Only slightly. But enough. Everett saw it. Nancy saw it. Edith did too. Hugh stood. He put on his gloves slowly. "You should be careful, Miss Harrow." Everett stepped away from the wall. Hugh looked at him. "I mean with accusations." Edith closed the folio. "So do I." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Hugh put on his coat. "Come spring, you'll need buyers." Everett opened the door. "I'll find one." Cold air rushed into the kitchen. Hugh walked past him. At the threshold, he glanced back at Edith. The politeness was gone now. Then he stepped into the snow. They listened to his horse leave the yard. No one moved until the hoofbeats had faded down the road. Nancy exhaled first. "Well." Everett shut the door. He turned toward Edith. "You shouldn't have had to do that." She frowned. "Do what?" "Stand between us." "I wasn't standing between you." "You stopped me." "Yes." His expression remained tight. Edith rose. "If you'd thrown him out before he answered anything, we'd know less than we know now." "I wasn't going to throw him." Nancy looked over. Everett corrected himself. "Far." Edith's mouth twitched. He did not smile. Instead, he looked at the closed folio. "He came for those papers." "Yes. And now he knows we have them." "Yes." A long silence followed. Then Everett said, "Nobody's ever done that before." Edith looked up. "Done what?" "Stood beside me in a fight without waiting for me to fight it for them." The room seemed smaller. Nancy quietly picked up the coffee pot and carried it toward the pantry, though it did not need carrying. Edith looked at Everett. His anger had gone somewhere else now. The distance between them was perhaps 3 feet. It felt like less. "I didn't need you to speak for me," she said. "I know." That answer came quickly. Edith's fingers rested on the folio clasp. "But I knew you would." Everett's eyes held hers. "Yes." Neither looked away. She remembered snow on his shoulders. The porch. The moment he had stepped back. His gaze dropped to the hand that had held his sleeve, then returned to her face. Edith felt the same pull she had felt beneath the porch roof, only sharper now because both of them understood it. Everett drew a slow breath. Then he reached past her, not touching. He took the Barrett receipt from the table and placed it inside the folio. "Lock these in your room tonight." Edith nodded. "I will." He closed the folio carefully. His fingers remained on the leather beside hers. For 1 heartbeat. 2. Then he removed his hand. Outside, Hugh Barrett was somewhere on the road to Elk Run. Inside High Meadow, Edith understood something else. The danger had changed. Hugh knew what she had found. And Everett Granger was no longer the only reason she intended to stay. For nearly 3 weeks, nothing happened. That was the worst part. No threatening letters arrived. No rider appeared on the ridge. Hugh Barrett did not return to High Meadow. The ranch moved through December as though the confrontation had never happened. Cattle were fed before daylight. Ice had to be broken from the troughs with an axe handle. Nancy hung wet mittens near the stove and complained whenever Sam tracked snow across her clean floor. Edith continued copying the Barrett figures into a second set of notes, keeping the originals locked inside her room. Every night, the brass key turned beneath her hand. Every morning, Everett was there. They had become careful around one another, not distant. Careful. Sometimes he stood across the kitchen table while she read figures aloud, one large hand braced against the chair back. Sometimes she looked up and found him already watching her. Neither mentioned the porch in the first snow. Neither mentioned what almost happened. Then, 4 days before Christmas, a carriage appeared on the Elk Run Road. Edith saw it through the kitchen window. Black body, polished brass lamps, 2 matched horses. Her hand stopped above the ledger. She knew the carriage. Nancy followed her gaze. "Someone you know?" Edith did not answer. The carriage crossed the gate. Everett came out of the barn carrying a pitchfork. He stopped in the yard. George Harrow stepped down. Even after months of Montana winter, he looked exactly as Edith remembered him. Dark wool coat brushed clean, gloves fitted close at the wrist, silver-headed cane that he did not need. The sight of him pulled something old through her body before she could stop it. Her shoulders stiffened. Her stomach tightened. Nancy noticed. "Your father?" Edith nodded. Nancy set down the dish towel. "I'll put coffee on." "No." Nancy looked at her. Edith swallowed. "Please don't make anything for him." Nancy's mouth flattened. "Gladly." Outside, George spoke to Everett. Edith could not hear the words through the glass. She saw Everett look toward the house. Then George did too. Their eyes met through the window. Her father smiled. Not warmly. As if he had expected to find her exactly where he had left her. Edith closed the ledger. By the time George entered, she was standing beside the kitchen table. Everett came behind him. He removed his hat, but not his coat. George looked around. His gaze moved over the stove, the plain shelves, the crockery, the ledger, then Edith. "You look well." She said nothing. His eyes traveled over her dress. "You haven't changed much." There it was, The old cut, small enough to deny, sharp enough to feel. Edith rested one hand on the back of the chair. What do you want? George's eyebrows lifted. I've come a considerable distance. You didn't answer. Everett shifted near the doorway. George glanced at him. I'd prefer to discuss family matters privately. Edith looked at Everett. Stay. George's mouth tightened. Everett took one step farther into the room and leaned against the wall. He did not speak. George removed a leather document case from beneath his coat. I have papers requiring your signature. He placed the case on the table. Edith did not touch it. What papers? Your mother's estate. For a moment the room changed. The stove ticked. Wind rubbed a bare branch against the roof. Edith looked at the case. My mother's estate was settled years ago. Most of it. George opened the clasp. He removed several folded sheets tied with blue ribbon. There was a separate trust. Edith stared at him. He continued. Your mother's father established it shortly before his death. It passes fully to you when you turn 28. Edith's birthday was in February. She looked down at the documents. How much? George hesitated. That told her enough. How much? Enough to be useful. To whom? His jaw shifted. To the family. Everett's eyes moved from George to Edith. George spread one of the papers flat. The Harrow cattle interests have experienced temporary difficulty. Edith almost laughed. Temporary difficulty. The same words he had used at High Meadow. What does this require? Only your signature authorizing a transfer against the trust once it becomes available. To you. To the family business. To you. George's voice cooled. Do not be childish. The old instinct came back. Apologize. Sit down. Do not embarrass him. Edith felt it rise and then stop. High Meadow was around her. Nancy's apron hung beside the stove. Everett's white coffee mug sat upside down on a drying cloth. Her ledger lay open under her own hand. She did not sit. No. George blinked. What? I won't sign it. He stared at her. Then he smiled faintly. You don't understand what you're refusing. I understand enough. You understand cattle bookkeeping because someone let you play clerk for a season. Everett straightened. Edith lifted one hand slightly without looking at him. He stopped. George saw. His face hardened. You think this is independence? Edith said nothing. He gestured toward the room. This? His eyes moved over the plain walls. The ranch? The kitchen? That man? Everett's jaw tightened. George stepped closer to Edith. You were sent here because you required correction. No. I am your father. Yes. You have an obligation to your name. Edith looked at him. What obligation did my name have to me? For the first time, George had no immediate answer. Then the anger came. Not loud. Worse. Controlled. I came here prepared to forgive this unfortunate episode. Edith almost smiled. Forgive me? You've lived under the roof of an unmarried cattleman for months. People talk. I have already had to answer questions in Missouri. Then stop answering them. His face colored. You will come home. No. Edith. No. The word filled the kitchen more completely than she expected. George's gaze flicked toward Everett. Something changed in it. Calculation. He lowered his voice. Do you truly believe he wants you? Edith went still. Everett moved away from the wall. George continued before he could speak. Look at yourself. The words were familiar. They had lived in mirrors with her for years. You think a man like Granger suddenly developed sentimental affection? He knows what you stand to inherit. Perhaps he knew before you did. Everett's face changed. Edith saw it. Not guilt. Fury. George pressed harder. He is a rancher short on winter money. You are a woman desperate enough to mistake courtesy for devotion. Do you really imagine this ends with love? Edith's throat closed. The cruelty worked because some part of it landed where old wounds still lived. She looked at Everett. He did not rush toward her, did not deny it, did not defend himself. He simply waited. That almost hurt more. Then Edith understood why. He would not answer the question for her. She looked back at George. Everett. His eyes met hers. Would you leave us alone? George's expression brightened by half a degree. Everett did not look at him, only at Edith. Are you sure? Yes. He nodded. Then he walked out. The door closed softly behind him. George exhaled as if sanity had finally returned to the room. Good. Edith turned. Don't. He stopped. You wanted privacy. You have it. She placed both palms on the table. Now hear me. George stared. She had never spoken to him that way. Neither had she. You left me here without asking whether I agreed. I gave you an opportunity. You used me as a debt. I gave you structure. You humiliated me in a ranch yard. For your own good. Edith looked at the papers between them. And now you've come because you need my money. His face tightened. Your money came from this family. My mother left it, because she trusted me to manage what she could not. Edith almost flinched. Then she remembered her mother's ruler across a ledger line. Don't trust a total just because someone wrote it neatly. No. George's hand struck the table. Not hard enough to damage anything, hard enough to make the papers jump. Enough. The old Edith would have gone quiet. This Edith picked up the papers. George watched. She folded them, slowly, then placed them back inside his leather case. I said no. His breathing changed. He looked toward the door, then back at her. You're throwing away your family for a man who may not even want you. Edith felt the blow. This time she let it land, then let it pass. Her hand closed the document case. For once, I know I want my own life. George said nothing. Edith pushed the case toward him. That's enough. His eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. Maybe. She surprised herself with the calmness of it. But it will be mine to regret. For several seconds, father and daughter stood across from each other with the kitchen table between them. Then George took the case. He put on his gloves. At the door, he paused. You'll come to your senses. Edith looked at him. No. He left. The carriage wheels began moving minutes later. Edith remained beside the table until the sound faded. Only then did she notice her hands shaking. The back door opened. Everett stepped inside. He stopped when he saw her. He did not ask what George had said, did not tell her she had done well. He walked to the stove, poured coffee into his white mug, then took a second cup from the shelf. He filled it, set it beside her. Edith wrapped both hands around the warmth. Everett stood across from her. Do you want me to say anything? She looked up, no. He nodded. They stayed that way a while. No touch, no promises, just the stove, the coffee, and the sound of winter settling around the house. Outside, the last light was leaving the south pasture. Several hours later, long after George's carriage had disappeared toward Elk Run, Sam Turner rode hard into the yard. Everett was on his feet before the boy reached the porch. Sam shoved open the kitchen door, breathing clouds into the cold air. South gate's open. Everett's face sharpened. What? Wide open. Cattle already moving toward the timber. Edith set down her cup. Outside, snow had begun falling again. Sam pulled something from his coat pocket. A short length of leather, freshly cut. He put it on the table. The retaining thong didn't break. Everett looked at it. Edith did too. Someone had opened the gate, and whoever had done it had chosen the first hard snow after George Harrow rode away. Everett picked up the cut thong from the table. The leather was stiff with cold, but the edge was clean. Not torn, not chewed, cut. "How many cattle are out?" he asked. Sam pulled off one glove with his teeth. Couldn't count in the dark. Maybe 40, maybe more. Everett was already reaching for his coat. "Wake Lewis." Sam turned for the door. Edith stood. "I'm coming." Everett stopped. "No." The word came quickly, too quickly. Edith looked at him. For a moment, neither moved. Something passed across Everett's face. He heard himself. So did she. His hand tightened around the cut leather. "Edith, you just spent 4 months telling me I decide what I can do. This isn't a ride to the north fence, I know. Snow's thickening. That creek will be ice at the edges. I know that too." Everett looked toward the window. Wind drove white against the glass, then back at her. His shoulders lowered slightly. "You're right." The admission came without excuse. He stepped closer. "I shouldn't have ordered you." Edith's anger loosened by a degree. Everett continued. "If you come, stay beside me until we know where the herd went. Not stay behind me, beside me." Edith nodded. "I can do that." Nancy appeared from the hallway, fastening her robe. "You two planning to argue all night or save the cattle?" That ended it. Within 15 minutes, the yard was alive. Lanterns swung from hooks. Sam and Lewis saddled in the barn while Everett pulled on heavy gloves and checked girths himself. Edith changed from her house dress into a thick wool skirt, riding boots, and the old coat Nancy had altered for her shoulders. Daisy stood quietly while Edith saddled her. This time, no narrow borrowed saddle. The broader one Everett had fitted in September settled properly across the mare's back. Everett noticed. He said nothing. He only tightened one strap after Edith checked the rest. Their hands touched at the buckle. Neither lingered. Outside the barn, the world had almost disappeared. The snow was not yet a blizzard, but it came hard enough to erase hoof prints within minutes. Lantern light reached only a short distance ahead before dissolving into white. Everett mounted a big sorrel gelding named Duke. South fence first. They rode out. High meadow vanished behind them. The south pasture lay lower than the house but opened toward a long, timbered slope cut by an icy creek. In good weather, cattle drifted toward an abandoned hay meadow beyond the trees. In snow, the country changed shape. Fence posts became shadows. Low ground disappeared. The creek could look solid where it was not. At the gate, Sam dismounted. The leather loop that normally held the latch had been sliced through. Everett leaned from the saddle. "Tracks? Too covered." Lewis lifted his lantern. Somebody knew which gate. Edith looked through the opening. The cattle tracks had already blurred, but the broad churn of the herd still showed where dark earth had been kicked through snow. Everett pointed uphill. "They'll push for timber." Edith shook her head. "Not all of them." He turned. She looked toward the lower draw. "The cows with late calves won't climb if the snow gets deeper." Sam frowned. Then they'll scatter. No. Edith pictured the ledger. Not columns now. Animals. Numbers attached to pasture notes. She had copied Everett's winter feed records twice. The old hay ground. Everett's eyes narrowed. What about it? You fed 37 head there last February when the North Stacks iced over. Yes. Would they remember it? Everett looked toward the dark draw. Lewis said, "Cattle remember feed." Edith continued, "The older cows will lead downhill if the wind keeps coming from the ridge. If they follow the creek, they'll end up near that hay ground." Everett stared into the snow, then at her. "That's 2 miles east. Less if they cut the draw." He made the decision. "Sam, Lewis, take the upper timber. Turn anything you find downhill." Both men nodded. Everett pointed toward Edith. "You're with me." They rode east. The snow thickened. Daisy picked her way carefully, head low, breath steaming around the bit. Edith leaned forward slightly, letting the mare choose her footing the way Everett had taught her. For nearly half an hour they saw nothing. Then came a sound beneath the wind, a low bawl. Everett raised one hand. They stopped. Again. Closer. They rode over a small rise. Dark shapes moved below. Cattle. A dozen at first, then more behind them. Everett let out a breath. "You were right." Edith looked down the draw. "Not enough." He counted quickly. 26. There should be more. They moved farther east. The old hay ground appeared as a pale, open space bordered by willow and cottonwood. Several cattle stood there nosing through snow where last year's hay had left a faint scent in the soil. More came from the timber. 30, 35, 40. Sam's shout carried from uphill. "We've got the rest!" Relief barely had time to settle before a cow broke from the group and moved toward the creek. Others followed. Everett swore under his breath. "Keep them off the crossing." He moved Duke forward. Edith followed. The creek was narrow here, but fast beneath a skin of ice along the banks. Snow hid the stones. Everett angled his horse toward the lead cow. Duke stepped onto the edge. His front hoof slid. Everything happened at once. The gelding lurched sideways. Everett pulled the rein. Ice broke beneath one hind leg. Duke went down hard. Everett disappeared with him. "Everett!" Edith was off Daisy before she remembered dismounting. Cold water reached above her boots as she stumbled toward the creek edge. Duke thrashed once, regained his feet, and scrambled toward the bank. Everett did not. He lay half in the water against a stone shelf, one leg twisted beneath him. Edith dropped beside him. "Everett." His eyes opened. He tried to rise. Pain stopped him. "Don't." "I'm fine." "You are lying in a creek." Fair point. Even then. Even now. The absurdity almost made her cry. She hooked one arm beneath his shoulder. He was impossibly heavy, not because she was weak, because he was Everett. 6'7" of bone, muscle, wet coat, and stubbornness. He tried to push with one leg. His face went white. "Ankle, I know. You don't know. I know from the way you're pretending it doesn't hurt." He looked at her. Then a sound escaped him that might have been a laugh if he had more breath. Edith planted both boots against the muddy bank. On 3. "Edith." 1. "You're not lifting me." 2. He looked at her. 3. Everett pushed with his good leg. Edith hauled with everything she had. For several seconds, neither seemed to move. Then his shoulder came over the bank. Another inch. His arm went around her, not pulling her down, but using her balance. She braced his weight against her body. The same man who had once carried her trunk with one arm now leaned heavily against her shoulder. Edith's knees shook. She did not let go. Again. Everett pushed. This time they made it onto the snow. He rolled onto his back and closed his eyes. Edith bent over him, breathing hard. "Stay awake." "I am awake. Then look at me." His eyes opened. He did. For one strange second, the storm seemed farther away. Everett's hand came up and closed around her wrist. Not hard. Just there. "You came." Edith stared at him. "You asked me to stay beside you." His fingers tightened slightly. "So you did." Hoofbeats came through the snow. Sam and Lewis appeared. Sam slid from his horse. "Lord, Mr. Granger, save your prayers, get me up." Between Sam and Lewis, they got Everett onto Duke, though his face tightened when his injured foot moved. Edith mounted Daisy again. They worked the cattle slowly toward High Meadow. Everett should have led. He did not. He rode beside Edith. Once, when the herd began drifting north, Edith called the count before Sam did and sent Lewis toward the gap. Everett looked at her. No smile. Just trust. By the time the ranch lights appeared through the snow, Edith's hands were numb inside her gloves. Nancy stood on the porch with a lantern. She saw Everett's posture in the saddle and came down the steps immediately. "What happened?" "Horse slipped." Nancy looked at Edith. "And you? I'm fine." Everett said, "She pulled me out." Nancy's eyes moved between them. She said nothing. Inside, they cut Everett's boot away from the swelling ankle and wrapped it tightly. His ribs were bruised from the fall, but nothing seemed broken enough to stop his breathing. Nancy sent Sam for the doctor at first light, if the road allowed. Edith helped Everett to the front room chair. He lowered himself carefully. Then his eyes went to her soaked skirt. "You're freezing." "I'm not." "You are." Nancy pointed toward the hall. "Change before both of you become patients." Edith started toward her room. Sam came through the back door. He still held the cut gate thong. I checked the latch again. Everett looked up. Sam set the leather on the table. "There are knife marks on the post, too. Whoever opened it had trouble with the frozen loop." Nancy's face hardened. Lewis stepped in behind him. "Saw a horse track near the lower road, before the snow covered it. Shod different from ours." Everett's eyes moved toward the folio locked in Edith's room. Nobody had to say Hugh Barrett's name. Nobody had to say George Harrow's either. Edith looked at the cut leather. Her father's carriage had left only hours before the gate opened. Hugh Barrett already knew she held records that could ruin him. One of them wanted control of her money. The other wanted control of her evidence. And somewhere between Elk Run and High Meadow, someone had decided a winter storm might solve more than one problem at once. Everett shifted in the chair and winced. Edith crossed back to him. "You need to rest." His eyes met hers. "So do you." Neither moved. Then Everett looked down at the hand she had placed on the chair beside his. His own hand covered it. Carefully. For the first time, he did not pull away. Outside, the rescued cattle settled behind closed gates. Inside, Edith stood beside the giant cowboy she had once feared. And now the thought of losing him frightened her more than anything waiting on the road. By morning, the storm had eased. Snow still covered the ranch road, but the sky had cleared enough for Sam to make the ride into Elk Run. He returned after noon with Dr. Walter Pierce, an older man with a gray mustache, a black leather case, and the impatient manner of someone accustomed to treating ranchers who believed pain was optional. Everett sat in the front room with his injured leg stretched on a stool. Dr. Pierce examined the ankle, pressed along Everett's ribs, and ignored every attempt Everett made to wave him off. "Nothing broken that I can find," the doctor finally said. "Which is fortunate considering the size of you." Everett frowned. "How long? Before you can ride?" "Yes. Longer if you keep asking." Nancy hid a smile behind her hand. The doctor wrapped the ankle again and ordered several days with as little weight on it as possible. Everett objected. Dr. Pierce closed his case. "You can argue with me, or you can argue with that ankle. The ankle has more sense." Then he left. For the first time since Edith arrived at High Meadow, Everett could not disappear into work. He hated it. By the second day, he had tried to stand 3 times. Nancy threatened to hide his boots. By the third, Sam had moved ranch questions into the front room. "North Trough's holding. Check it again after dark." "We brought the calves down. Count them." "Already did." "Count them again." Sam looked toward Edith. She raised one eyebrow. Everett saw. "I'm injured, not dead." "No one said otherwise," Edith replied. "You both looked it." Sam suddenly remembered work outside. The front door closed behind him. Silence returned. That became the shape of those days. Not empty silence. Occupied silence. Edith brought Everett coffee in the mornings and set it on the small table near his chair. He always reached for the same white mug. At noon, she changed the wrapping on his ankle. The first time, Everett protested that he could manage. Edith placed the fresh bandage in his lap. "Then do it." He looked at the swollen joint, then at her. A moment passed. "Would you help?" "Yes." She knelt. Her hands were careful but firm, unwinding the old cloth and checking the swelling the way Dr. Pierce had shown her. Everett watched her fingers. "You've done this before?" "No." "You're very certain about it. That seems to bother you." "It worries me." She looked up. Their faces were closer than she expected. Everett went quiet. Edith finished the wrap and tied it securely. "There. Thank you." She stood. Neither mentioned how long his eyes followed her across the room. In the afternoons, Edith brought the ledger. Everett could not comfortably sit at the kitchen table, so she read figures aloud from the chair near the window. September feed, $68.12. Everett nodded. Freight, $19.40. He frowned. Too high. It was Barrett's rate. Then definitely too high. She smiled and marked the page. On the 4th evening, snow began again, lighter this time. Nancy had gone to bed early. The house settled around the low stove heat and the faint smell of coffee. Edith sat with the ledger open. Everett stared at the fire. "You should sleep. So should you." "I've done little else, you've complained. That takes energy." Edith looked down to hide a smile. Then Everett said, "Road'll be open soon." Her pencil stopped. She did not look up. "So you won't be stuck here." The words sat between them. Edith closed the ledger slowly. "I wasn't stuck here before." "No." Everett rubbed one thumb along the handle of his mug. "I know." She waited. He seemed to be choosing each word. "When your father left you here, you needed somewhere to stand until you decided what came next." Edith's throat tightened. "Maybe I've decided." His eyes lifted. "Have you?" She wanted to say yes. The answer was there. Not simple, not small, but there. Then Everett looked away. "You've got money coming in February. The trust, her mother's inheritance. You could go anywhere. The quiet way he said it hurt more than if he had asked her to stay. Edith set the pencil down. Do you want me to leave? Everett's head turned sharply. No. The answer came too fast. Neither of them moved. Then his voice lowered. But that's not the same thing as asking you to stay. Why? He looked toward the fire. Because I don't want you choosing this ranch, because it's the first place that didn't hurt you. Edith stared at him. Everett continued. Safety isn't the same as love. The word changed the air. Love. Neither had used it before. Everett's jaw tightened, as though he regretted speaking it. Edith stood, not because she was angry, because sitting had become impossible. You think I don't know the difference? I think you've had very little chance to find out. She looked at him. His face held no challenge, only fear, though Everett would probably have called it something else. Edith picked up the ledger. The roads aren't open yet. No. So perhaps we don't have to settle spring tonight. Everett nodded. No. She carried the ledger into the kitchen, then went to her room. The little brass key waited in the lock. Edith closed the door. For months that sound had comforted her. Click. Her room. Her boundary. Her decision. She sat on the edge of the bed and removed the key. It lay small and dull in her palm. The first night, it had meant no one could enter unless she allowed it. Now she understood there was another side to a locked door. She was also the one who could open it. Edith turned the key between her fingers. She thought of Everett stepping back beneath the snow. Everett listening when she told him not to confront Barrett. Everett obeying when she asked him to leave the kitchen with George. Everett correcting himself at the pasture gate, then leaning his enormous weight against her at the creek because there had been no choice except to trust her. A knock sounded. Edith looked up. Nancy? Yes. Edith opened the door. Nancy stood in the hall wearing her dark morning dress despite the late hour. She held an envelope. Old paper. Creased once down the middle. This can wait until daylight, Edith said. Nancy looked at the key in Edith's hand. No, I think it waited long enough. They went to the kitchen. Everett had fallen asleep in the front room chair. His head tipped slightly to one side, one hand resting near the blanket over his injured leg. Nancy lowered her voice. He didn't tell you everything about the day your father left. Edith looked at her. What do you mean? Nancy placed the envelope on the table. Everett's handwriting showed across the front. George Harrow, Elk Run Hotel, dated the morning after Edith arrived. Edith touched the edge. What is this? A copy? Of what? Nancy pulled out a chair. Everett rode into Elk Run before sunrise that next morning. Edith glanced toward the sleeping man in the other room. He never told me. No. What did he do? Nancy pushed the letter toward her. You should read it yourself. Edith unfolded the paper. The first lines were short, formal. Then she reached the sentence in the middle. Her breathing slowed. She read it again. Across the room, Everett shifted in his sleep but did not wake. Nancy said nothing. Edith kept staring at the page. All those months, she had believed Everett had merely been kind enough to change her father's arrangement. The letter suggested something else, something he had done before she had earned a place at High Meadow, before the Ledgers, before Daisy, before the red dress, before the snow. Edith looked at Nancy. Why didn't he tell me? Nancy folded her hands. Maybe because he didn't want you feeling grateful for something he thought should have been ordinary. Edith looked back at the letter. The brass key rested beside her hand, and for the first time she understood that Everett Granger had protected her freedom before either of them had any idea what she might eventually choose to do with it. Edith read the letter again. The handwriting was Everett's. Square. Plain. No flourishes. Mr. Harrow. Miss Edith Harrow's employment at High Meadow Ranch belongs to Miss Harrow alone. Her wages will not be credited against any debt you owe me. Your account remains unchanged. Edith stopped there. Below it, Everett had written the amount of the debt and the date by which he expected George to settle it. Nothing sentimental. Nothing about kindness. Nothing about saving her. Just a line drawn cleanly between her father's obligation and her life. Nancy watched from across the table. "He mailed that before breakfast," she said. Edith looked toward the front room. Everett still slept. "Why did he make a copy?" "Because he doesn't trust memory when money's involved." A faint smile touched Edith's mouth. "That sounds unlike the man whose receipts were kept beside Nutmeg." Nancy considered that. He learned. Edith folded the letter carefully. "Where did my wages go?" Nancy did not answer right away. Edith looked up. "Nancy?" The older woman leaned back. "That's the second part." Morning came pale and cold. Everett woke stiff and irritable, though the swelling in his ankle had gone down. He tried to stand without help and nearly lost his balance. Edith caught his arm. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "I can manage." "I know." She did not let go until he was steady. At breakfast, she said nothing about the letter. Neither did Nancy. Everett noticed. "What?" Nancy buttered toast. "Nothing." He looked at Edith. She sipped coffee. "Nothing." Everett frowned. "That means something." Edith set down the cup. "Your aunt and I are going to Elk Run." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" Nancy answered. "Business." "What business?" "Women's business." Everett looked unconvinced. Edith almost laughed. By 10, Sam had hitched the small ranch wagon. The road into town was packed hard by sled runners and wagon wheels. Snow lay deep in the fields, but the sky had cleared to a hard winter blue. Elk Run looked smaller in January. Smoke rose from chimneys. The boardwalk in front of Heller's Mercantile had been shoveled, leaving white banks on either side. Horses stood tied outside the livery with blankets thrown across their backs. Nancy directed Sam past the general store. "Bank." Edith turned toward her. "What bank?" "The one you're about to enter." The Elk Run Bank occupied a narrow brick building near the county office. Inside, a brass stove ticked near the wall. A clerk with wire spectacles looked up from a high desk. When he saw Nancy, he stood. "Mrs. Granger." "Nancy." He corrected himself. "Nancy." His eyes moved to Edith. "Miss Harrow." Edith nodded. Nancy said, "Mr. Bell, she needs to see the Granger wage account." The clerk hesitated. Then understanding settled over his face. He went to a cabinet behind the counter. Edith looked at Nancy. "What wage account?" Nancy only waited. Mr. Bell returned with a ledger. He opened it on the counter and turned the book toward Edith. Her name appeared at the top. Edith Harrow. Below it were deposits. $20, $20, $20, month after month. Edith stared. "Everett opened this?" "The morning after you arrived." Mr. Bell adjusted his spectacles. "He instructed us to hold your wages in your name. and release them whenever you requested. Edith counted silently. August partial wage. September. October. November. December. Every dollar. Untouched. She looked at the clerk. He never told me. Mr. Bell seemed uncomfortable with that question. Nancy answered. He expected you'd ask when you wanted it. Edith's throat tightened. High Meadow had been short on cash before winter. She knew that now better than anyone. There had been weeks when Everett delayed buying new tack. Weeks when Nancy stretched flour. Weeks when Sam's wages were paid before Everett bought anything for himself. Yet Edith's money had still gone into the bank. Every month. What if the ranch had failed? Nancy's face softened. He would still have owed you wages. Edith looked down at her name. Something moved inside her, quiet and painful. Not gratitude exactly. Something deeper. Being trusted with freedom was harder to bear than being protected from danger. Mr. Bell closed the ledger after Edith finished. There is another matter. Nancy glanced at him. He lowered his voice. Mr. Granger asked whether I had seen Hugh Barrett recently. Edith went still. I have. When? 2 days ago. Mr. Bell nodded toward the window. Met with a drover named Calvin Moss. Fellow works seasonal cattle runs. Edith knew the name from shipping receipts. Does he work for Barrett? Off and on. Nancy's face tightened. Edith thought of the gate, the cut thong, the unfamiliar horseshoe track near the lower road. Where is he now? Mr. Bell hesitated. Livery, last I heard. They found Sam outside before Edith could decide whether asking questions was wise. He listened, then said, I know Moss. Nancy looked at him. Since when? Trail work last year. Could you recognize his horse? Sam nodded. Dark roan. Left hind shoe has a squared heel. Blacksmith fitted it after the horse split a hoof. Edith felt cold despite the stove heat lingering in her coat. Lewis had said the track near the gate was shod differently from High Meadow horses. Check the livery, she said. Sam looked at Nancy. Nancy said, You heard her. The roan was there. Its left hind shoe carried the squared heel. Sam crouched near the stall and ran his fingers over the iron. Same sort of mark Lewis saw. That alone proved little. Then the liveryman came out, wiping his hands on a rag. Looking at Moss's horse? Sam stood. Was he out the night of the big snow? The man frowned. Yeah. Where? Said Barrett paid him to carry a message west. Edith exchanged a look with Nancy. West where? The liveryman shrugged. Didn't say. By evening, Everett knew everything. He sat at the kitchen table with his injured ankle extended beneath it while Edith placed the bank information and Sam's account before him. When she finished, Everett looked at Nancy. You showed her? Yes. His jaw tightened. Wasn't your business. It became mine when you hid something decent so thoroughly she nearly mistook you for a fool. Edith looked down to hide a smile. Everett turned toward her. I wasn't hiding it. You never told me. You had a bank account. I didn't know, yeah. You knew what I owed you. I thought you were keeping the money here. He frowned. Why would I do that? Edith stared at him, then laughed. A real laugh. Everett looked offended. Nancy looked pleased. The room eased for half a minute. Then Sam came through the back door. He carried a folded paper. Found Moss. Everett's expression hardened. Where? At the livery. And? He didn't want trouble. Sam put the paper on the table. Hugh paid him $10 to ride to High Meadow the night Mr. Harrow left. Edith's hand tightened. Everett unfolded the paper. Sam continued. Moss says Barrett told him to open the south gate, said he wanted cattle scattered long enough to keep everyone busy while snow covered tracks around the road. Nancy whispered, "Why?" Sam shook his head. He says Barrett didn't explain. Edith knew. The records. Everett looked at her. "If we lost cattle," she said, "you'd have a winter crisis. Maybe you'd have to sell fast. Maybe you'd stop chasing old losses because you needed Barrett again." Everett's face went still. Sam nodded. Moss signed a statement for $5 and a promise we wouldn't go after him ourselves. Nancy looked at Sam. $5? He wanted 10. Everett almost smiled. Almost. The statement, the altered receipts, the false shipment, and the gate evidence were enough to force the matter into the open. Within 2 weeks, Hugh Barrett sat across from Everett and Edith in the office of Territorial Attorney Nathan Cole in Elk Run. There was no shouting. That disappointed half the town. Barrett denied more than Edith could prove and admitted less than everyone knew, but the documents were clean. The figures matched. Moss's statement tied him to the gate. Nathan Cole made the choices plain. Settle, or answer the allegations before a territorial court. Hugh settled. High Meadow recovered much of the missing money. He surrendered future cattle dealings in Elk Run and rode south before February. Edith watched his wagon leave from the bank window. She felt almost nothing. That surprised her. Justice, she discovered, was quieter than revenge. A few days later, her 28th birthday arrived. A letter from the Missouri trustee followed. Her mother's inheritance was now legally hers. No signature from George. No permission. No husband required to receive it. Edith sat at the kitchen table with 3 things before her. The trustee's letter, the bank ledger showing her wages, and Everett's old letter to her father. Everett stood at the stove pouring coffee. She looked at him. He noticed. "What?" "Nothing." He raised an eyebrow. She smiled. This time, nothing really did mean nothing. Because for the first time in her life, Edith Harrow possessed enough money to leave any house she wished, enough to travel east, enough to rent a place in Elk Run, enough to begin something of her own. High Meadow no longer held her through poverty. George no longer held her through inheritance. Everett had never held her at all. That was the frightening part. She was free, completely. And now she would have to decide whether staying with Everett Granger meant less freedom, or whether choosing him might be the freest thing she had ever done. Winter did not leave High Meadow all at once. It loosened slowly. First, water began running beneath the ice along the creek. Then dark patches of earth appeared around the south-facing fence posts. By March, the roofs dripped through most afternoons, and by April, the lower pasture had turned from gray to a thin, stubborn green. Everett's ankle healed with the season. He walked without the cane Dr. Pierce had left behind, though Nancy caught him limping after long days and said nothing unless he pretended otherwise. Edith noticed too. She noticed everything now. The way Everett rubbed his left ankle after checking the north fence. The way he still waved the oil lamp closer to her side of the table without thinking. The way her white coffee cup appeared beside his most mornings, already filled. They had not spoken about love, not directly. Perhaps that was why it seemed to be everywhere. In February, Edith's inheritance was transferred through the Elk Run Bank. She did not touch it for several weeks. George wrote twice. The first letter was formal. The second was angry. Edith read both, then placed them in the bottom drawer of her desk without answering. One April morning, she carried the high meadow ledger onto the porch where Everett was repairing a broken halter. "I want to talk business." He glanced up. "That sounds dangerous." "It may be." He set the leather punch aside. Edith opened the book. "Hugh's settlement covers the winter shortfall and replaces most of what he took." "Yes. The spring cattle are in good condition." "Mostly. Sam says the upper grass came through better than expected. Sam talks too much." Edith ignored that. She turned the ledger toward him. "I want to buy half of High Meadow." Everett stared at her. The yard went strangely quiet. Somewhere inside the barn, a horse knocked against a stall board. Everett looked down at the figures, then back at her. "No." Edith had expected resistance. She had not expected the answer that quickly. "No. No." "Why?" "You don't need to buy a place here. That's not what I said. You can stay as long as you want." Edith closed the ledger. "As what?" Everett went still. The question landed between them. She continued. "Your employee?" "No." "Your guest?" "No." "Then what?" His jaw tightened. Edith waited. Everett picked up the halter, then set it down again. "I don't want your money. I didn't offer you my money. You offered to put it into my ranch. Our ranch, if you accept." He looked away toward the pasture. Edith understood then. This was not pride about land. It was something else. "You think I'll regret it?" Everett said nothing. "You think if you take my money and things change between us, you'll have trapped me?" His eyes came back to hers. That was exactly it. Edith stepped closer. "You spent months making sure I could leave." "Yes. Then trust me enough to let me stay without making myself responsible for the choice." Everett's expression shifted. She opened the ledger again. "I am not asking you to give me land. I am buying an interest at a fair valuation." "Edith, you taught me that the wrong saddle does not make the rider wrong." His mouth moved despite himself. She continued. "Well, the wrong arrangement does not make partnership wrong either." For several seconds, Everett said nothing. Then he looked down at the figures. "You calculated the value?" "3 times. Of course you did." And Nathan Cole checked the terms. Everett's head came up. "You already spoke to Cole?" "Yesterday." He stared at her. Then a low laugh escaped him. It was rare enough that Edith felt it more than heard it. "You're serious?" "Entirely." 3 days later, they sat side by side in Nathan Cole's office in Elk Run. The room smelled of paper, stove coal, and leather bindings. A territorial map hung behind the attorney's desk. Outside the window, wagon wheels rolled through spring mud along Main Street. Nathan read each clause aloud. High Meadow Ranch would be held equally, half to Everett Granger, half to Edith Harrow. Expenses and profits shared. Major land sales requiring both signatures. Neither party able to mortgage the other's share without written consent. Everett stopped Nathan twice to make the protections for Edith stronger. Edith stopped him once. "Equal," she said. Everett looked at her. "Not safer for me. Not safer for you. Equal." Nathan hid a smile behind his hand. Everett sighed. "Equal." They signed. Everett's name first, then Edith's. She watched the ink dry. Edith Harrow, half of High Meadow Ranch. Not because someone had given it to her, because she had bought it. Outside the office, Everett stood on the boardwalk beneath a pale spring sun. "You can still change your mind." Edith looked at him. The deed is recorded. About staying. She almost laughed. Everett Granger, you are the most stubborn man I have ever met. I've been told worse. They rode home beneath a sky so clear the mountains seemed close enough to touch. By early May, wildflowers appeared along the creek. Fence work began again. Calves moved beside their mothers through fresh grass. The ranch felt awake. One evening, Edith found Everett standing at the front gate. The same gate where George had left her 8 months earlier. He had one hand resting on the top rail. She came down the path carrying the ledger under one arm. What are you doing? Thinking. Should I be worried? Probably. She stopped beside him. The road stretched east toward Elk Run. Dry now. Open. Nothing prevented her from taking it. Everett looked toward the road too. You've got your inheritance. Yes. Your wages. Yes. Half the ranch. Edith smiled. I'm familiar with my finances. He glanced at her, then looked away again. You could still go anywhere. There it was. The question he had been asking since winter. Not stay. Not leave. Choose. Edith set the ledger on the fence rail. What do you want me to do? Everett's face tightened. No. No? I'm not answering that first. She watched him. He drew a slow breath. What do you want? The words were almost the same as the first question he had ever asked her. Did you agree to any of this? Edith looked at the road, then at High Meadow. The house stood warm in the evening light. Nancy's curtains moved in the kitchen window. Sam was closing the far corral. Daisy grazed near the barn. Then Edith looked at Everett. I want to stay. Something moved across his face. Hope quickly controlled. As my partner? Edith stepped closer. No. Everett stopped breathing for a second. She reached for his hand. Her fingers looked small inside his. If you'll have me as your wife. The giant cowboy stared at her. Edith had seen him face Hugh Barrett without blinking, had seen him ride into a snowstorm, had watched him climb out of an icy creek with pain written across his face. Now he looked completely lost. Everett? He swallowed. You're asking me? Yes. His hand tightened around hers. Edith, are you certain? She almost laughed. Instead, she moved closer. I'm not staying because I was given to you. His eyes held hers. I'm staying because I choose you. Everett closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, all the restraint she had watched for months was still there. But now it had nowhere left to hide. He lifted one hand to her cheek, slowly, giving her time. Edith leaned into his palm. That was answer enough. He bent toward her. She rose slightly onto her toes. Their first kiss was quiet. No audience, no music, no spectacle. Just spring wind moving through the cottonwoods, and Everett's hand trembling once against her cheek before becoming still. They married 3 weeks later. Late May. The ceremony took place beside High Meadow's front porch because Nancy said there was no sense hauling half the ranch into Elk Run when Reverend Thomas Hale owned a perfectly good wagon. Edith wore the red dress. Everett wore a dark coat that Nancy had spent 2 days brushing into respectability. Sam stood with him. Nancy cried only once and denied it afterward. Several families came from Elk Run carrying pies, bread, preserved fruit, and more advice than either bride or groom needed. George Harrow did not attend. An invitation had not been sent. Edith thought about that once. Only once. After the vows, a neighbor named Frank Miller watched Everett carry 2 feed sacks toward the barn while Edith followed with a basket of tools. He laughed. Big Granger treats that bride of his like a queen. Edith heard him. So did Everett. Everett looked puzzled. A queen? Frank grinned. You know what I mean. Everett looked toward Edith. She smiled. Because she did know. And Frank was wrong. Everett had never treated her like a queen. Queens could still be admired from a distance. Protected. Displayed. Spoken for. Everett had done something far rarer. He had treated her like an equal. Later that evening, they walked the north pasture together. Snow still capped the Bitterroot peaks, but the valley below had gone green. The creek ran high with spring melt. At the crossing, Everett stepped onto the first stone and turned. He held out his hand. Months earlier, Edith might have wondered whether he thought she could not cross alone. Now she knew better. She looked at his hand, then took it. Not because she needed him to carry her, not because she was afraid, because she wanted his hand in hers. They crossed together. Behind them stood High Meadow Ranch, half his and half hers. Ahead, the trail climbed gently beneath the mountains. Edith looked up at Everett. He squeezed her hand once and kept walking beside her. Maybe that was the part Edith would remember most. Not the wedding, not the inheritance, not even the day her name was written beside Everett's on the papers to High Meadow Ranch. It was that hand, offered, but never forced upon her. Imagine standing where Edith once stood, beside a trunk at a ranch gate, watching the person who should have protected you disappear down the road. Imagine spending years believing you took up too much space, asked for too much, or somehow had to earn the right to be loved. Then imagine meeting someone who never asked you to become smaller. Everett did not heal Edith by rescuing her. He simply gave her something she had rarely been given before, room to choose. And little by little, she learned that real love does not take away your freedom. It makes you feel safe enough to use it. Perhaps that is why she finally understood what home meant. It was not a place where someone agreed to keep her. It was a place where she could leave and still choose to stay. If Edith's journey touched something in you, tell me in the comments. What would you have chosen at that gate? And if you would like to spend more evenings with stories of wounded hearts, unexpected love, quiet courage, and people finding their way home, you're warmly invited to subscribe. There are many more stories waiting down the trail.